Yeah, just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about your dog life journey.
Okay, well, my name is Kathy Pavlich. I actually, as a breeder and exhibitor and the judge of bearded collies, and I started long, long ago in 4-H, raising sheep and rabbits. And coming from a large family, we didn't have many dogs because my father thought everybody would want their own dog. So it wasn't until I got married that I actually got my first dog, and my husband bought me a German Shepherd for a wedding present. And I started in competitive obedience, which was my dream was always to do that. And after a couple of years doing the obedience with my German Shepherds, I had several by then. I found this delightful little dog at a fun match, and I wanted to know what it was, and it was a bearded collie. So, being that I love to read and research, I spent the next couple of years going to shows and talking to breeders about bearded collies and what they were like, and the grooming and the training. And I bought my first bearded collie from a well-known breeder in New York, Big Schneider, who's since passed away. He was my mentor for years, and that was 1985. And we went on to compete in conformation. From there, I ended up having several dogs that I bred of different bloodlines, and we've done agility, we've done herding, we've done obedience. And the newest thing that I've kind of gotten interested in is dog diving with my bearded collies. Was that a short synopsis of the bearded collies and where I am today? So it's been about 35 years, and I'm on to my seventh generation of bearded collies.
Wow. And could you tell us what about the bearded collies that fascinated you in the beginning?
Well, one of the main reasons was I was looking for a little bit smaller dog than a German Shepherd. One of my older shepherds got ill, and we lived kind of in an isolated area. I was not able to pick him up and put him in the car by myself, and I decided I wanted a breed that if anything ever happened, I was running in the hills or we were stuck, I could carry my dog out. As a beardie, a female around 40 to 45 pounds, and the male's about 50, and I could still pack a dog like that if I had an emergency and carry it. And that was the one thing, was I was looking for a medium-sized dog. And back then, you didn't need to do as much grooming as you see now. So that is a little bit of a decrement because there's a lot of grooming out if you're going into the room, show ring. But in reality, what really attracted me was the fact they're so happy. They're just the happiest breed you can be around. They've never had a bad day. When I was at a show and investigating, I came upon some people that had some beardies that I've known for years now, and they had 5 males in an exercise pen all swapped on top of each other. And I said, "They're all males?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "They all get along?" I said, "Oh, beardies get along with everybody." And that exuberance and that bounce and that happiness, they just make you laugh. And that was probably the main reason I thought this is going to be a fun dog to show.
Right, absolutely. Can you talk about the history of the bearded collie and
Yeah, it's actually fascinating. In my research over all the years, bearded collies almost went extinct during the World War II, and then they were brought back by one woman, and they are a working breed. But as a herding breed, they're not a dog that's used in close in the corrals. You will see them at herding trails, but they were actually used in large open areas with the stock in Scotland, and they do have a bark, and that bark is used to drive the stock. And that they can tend to go back to a line called the Hunaway, which is the barking dog that you'll actually see in Australia and New Zealand. And so their main focus was kerning. I would never get a bearded collie for a protection dog. I tell people that because what they'll do is they'll open the door for somebody and say, "Come on in," and they'll be your best friend. They're not a guardian dog. They're definitely a herding dog. And that instinct, which is fascinating in what they were collie, even though people do trial, the very few people have been breeding for that instinct and get it still there. And it's very strong.
Mhm.
And they come in 4 different colors. And they have what's called a fading gene, which means a black bearded collie is born black, and by the time it's a year old, it could be a platinum color. Or a blue bearded collie is born blue, which is a dilute. In a year, it could be a darker color. So you never know what color you're going to end up with.
Mhm.
So they're kind of called the chameleon of the dog show world. They change colors their whole life.
Wow.
It's fascinating. And I have a hard time explaining it to people when I said, look at their nose. When you look at their nose, that's the color the dog is. You've got a black, you've got a blue, and a blue has a blue nose, a fawn has a fawn nose, and a brown has a brown nose. And then sometimes you can run into what's called the non-fading black, which is a berry that does not change color, and that's pretty rare in the breed. You don't see that very often, and a lot of times they say the non-fading black has a softer coat, and a bearded collie has a harsh outer coat. It's kind of fascinating as far as the colors, genetically, what bloodlines they're carrying, what they're not. And in the last, I can say 10 years with the health test and all the DNA, now we can actually test the dog to see what color that they're carrying uh, for genetics. Because I had a fabulous dog that I imported from Holland. His name was Haagen-Dazs, and he did not carry any color but black. So no matter what color the puppy he had, they were black. You could breed into blue, he'd have black puppies. And we didn't have the test then, and he actually passed away before we even had the DNA. But he never ever in his whole career ever produced anything but black. Yet his sister in Holland produced several different colors. So the genes are just fascinating. Well, the overall standard, we don't have any disqualification in the standards, but we have what are called serious faults. Okay, which means you can basically show anything, but a serious fault, like myself as a judge, you need to know the standard for the serious fault. And one of them is soft or silty coat, overly trimmed dog, scissored. They're not to be scissored whatsoever. Height over and above or below the standard. They're trying to keep the dog a medium-sized dog. And then your standard AKC, things like they don't want to see a shy dog, So a female is to go between 20 and 21 inches. Height over or under an inch above is to be somewhat penalized, but it's acceptable. And a male is to be 21 to 22 inches. I have seen giant dogs and I have seen small dogs, but they're trying to keep them a medium-sized dog. And those are the main issues you're looking at when you're judging. I'm looking for the temperament, number one, and the sound structure. Because a dog that is structurally sound and moves beautifully, has a good temperament, you're going to have less health issues with that dog because a structurally sound dog is not going to break down. You should be visualizing that, and you see them moving in the ring, that they're doing very little wasted motion of movement. I could say a female 40 to 45 pounds. If they get a little on the chunky side, they could go to 50 pounds. A male, probably 50 to 55 pounds. I've never had one over 50, but I'm also a runner, so my dogs run a lot. And I like to keep them nice and lean and fit. I have heard of dogs going up to 70 pounds, but I think that's probably a dog that's been overfed. So a medium-sized dog, females, 40. The females tend to be a little bit more independent than the males. And it's funny because people always call, I want a girl, I want a girl. I go, well, and if this is your first bearded collie, I'd probably get a male. And people are like, what do you mean? I go, well, the males tend to be more clingy to their owners and a little bit. Not that I haven't had females that weren't, but in reality, the girls tend to be much more independent than the boys. A lot of people are using them now for therapy. You will see bearded collies do fabulous going in the in the hospital and children's center. In the sport, and AKC and people that have dogs, you actually find a lot of agility. They do fabulous in agility. You see them a lot in herding. You do see them in obedience, but not as much as you would see in agility because they tend to be the clown. This is a dog that might go visit everybody outside the ring because they love people. You see them mainly as companions. Most of the people that contact me have had bearded collies. They love them, and they want them as companions and family dogs. The downside of the bearded collie, and I tell everybody right off the bat, is the grooming. You need to stay up on top of them. And if you're on like in a ranch or something, I say you really got to trim their feet so they don't pick up foxtails. Because they'll pick up everything into your house. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There is definitely grooming on the dog. I think it's staying within the standard. When you go in the ring, and say I'm judging a dog show and I see a dog come in and it looks like a girl. I want it to look like a female. I want to know that that's a female without having to look at the book and making sure that come in. And I want the male to have map, and the males are going to be bigger. They're going to carry a little bit more coat. The main concern I have for any breed that I have, especially the Very Collies, is a solid temperament. I want a dog that can handle everything, that's not vicious, that's not shy, that's not aggressive, and that's not spooky. That is, you do tend to find a little bit more of the sound sensitivity in some of the herding breeds. And I've seen that with bearded collie. Socialization is really important, that you get them out and teaching them when they're little not to jump on people. I mean, that sounds like a minor thing, but bearded collies will do that the rest of their life. Seriously. You would never know that you had a 12-year-old in the house. Somebody would think that this dog is probably 2 years old. They just love people. So the one thing I really concentrate when they're little is not to jump on people. Because you got grandma coming over, and you don't want to have to lock your dog up all the time because they're knocking grandma over. Right. That one thing you really have to work with. But you couldn't act for a friendlier dog. I mean, they just love people, and people are a little afraid of a dog. A bearded collie is a great dog to introduce them to dogs, so they're not going to cause any issues with somebody that's fearful.
Mm-hmm. And how are they to train, especially for the show ring and the competition field?
They're very easy to train. I have to say that my biggest thing is trying to teach a puppy to stand still. Because standing still is really hard when somebody's coming up to them and saying hello, and they just want to give everybody kisses and all that. It's a consistent and positive reinforcement is what you want to do almost all the time. Correcting a bearded collie, they're going to be devastated. I think if you just work with them several times a day. I just had somebody sent me a picture of their new puppy sitting on top of the dining room table. She says, "I think we're starting boot camp next week." And I said, uh-huh. So they're clowns. They can be escape artists. They can go over fences like they're standing still. But they like to be with their people all the time. They love to go to places. They like to be part of the action. It's very common for the bearded collie clubs all over the United States have what's called a bearded collie bounce. And you could turn 30 beardies out, and they're having a blast.
Right.
And they're all running. And it's called the beardie bounces, and they hold bounces all over the United States.
Wow.
Yeah, they really do have a lot of fun, and they're really gentle dogs. Really, really gentle. And the puppies are really smart, and they grow up smart. And I tell people, I say, we talked about this. I have border collies and bearded collies. My border collies don't get near as much trouble as my bearded collies do. They can figure out opening gates, open latches, and just go visit everybody. Several health issues that they dealt with recently has been some autoimmune diseases. And so one of the most important things I tell people, if you're researching breeder and you're looking to buy a puppy, make sure that they had their tests done that are recommended by Bearded Collie Club of America. And that would be hips, eye, and thyroid. And that's what's required. There's a program for the Orthopedic Foundation, OFA, which is called CHIP. And CHIP, the way CHIP is set up is that the breed clubs determine the health issues. And if you do these tests on your dogs, you are awarded a CHIP certificate. And so it's kind of really important that you follow through with hips, thyroid, and eye. There's also elbows that are being done, and they've started some new research into some autoimmune diseases that come up. But the main issues right now is eyes, hips, and thyroid. And usually if you get yourself a good thyroid panel on your dog and they're clear, that eliminates a lot of issues.
Right.
It actually has really gone down quite a bit. I was talking to another breeder the other day. She was concerned that people just aren't breeding the bearded collies much anymore because the fancy that people that are shown the dogs have gotten older. And we don't have a lot of young people coming to the sport. And so what's happened now, people are having a hard time finding bearded collies. And I tell everybody, I just had somebody writing this morning, I said, if you need to get on a list with a breeder and talk to them when they're planning their net. We just don't have puppies that somebody called and you pick up a puppy. I don't have the exact numbers for you, but I know it has gone down quite a bit. When I first started showing dogs, it was nothing to have, possibly 20 or 30 bearded collies in the ring. Now, maybe 3, maybe 4, if that. And our nationals are still good. and our specialties, which are just for the breed, are still good. With what's happened with the COVID this last year is everything's been canceled. So a lot of people aren't even breeding because of the COVID because there's no way to transport dogs or to get them to different spots. So the numbers have gone down. And I do think it has a lot to do with uh, COVID coming up and the fancy, as in what I call the people that are showing the dogs are getting older. Well, let's see it, I was 30 when I first started, and I'm in my 60s now.
Mhm.
I'm considered a young judge.
Wow.
The sport is a lot of people are getting quite a bit older.
Right.
We need more young people in there, is what we need. I
Okay.
think a lot of the factors are it's become quite an expensive
Right.
hobby.
Yeah.
And when you're young, do you have the money for motels? Do you have the money for gas? Do you have the money for entry? It's not it's a luxury hobby is what it is.
Right.
And you have to travel like we talked about where I live. My closest show for me, they have one local show here. Unfortunately, nobody comes to it because it's so far away from most of the main areas. Is 5 hours away, and that's through the mountains, and then you've got hotels on Gap, and I think the young people, unless their parents are actively engaged in it,
Right.
can't afford it. I just do think, and entry fees have gone up, and it's become a very, very competitive sport.
Uh-huh.
And so most of the people I used to show with are now hiring professional handlers to show their dogs because they're just not physically able to run around the ring.
Right.
And some people are also going to smaller breeds
Right.
that they can handle as they get older. And I seriously think about my dogs and my age and, you know, do I want to have that many dogs because who's going to take care of them if something happens to me? And so I think that is one thing why the older people aren't participating as much
Right.
in the sports.
Mhm.
But I don't think it's the dog sports. I think it's a lot of sports. I think it's a lot of activities that people used to, participate in that are no longer. And a lot what's happening in the clubs now is they're not getting new people in
Uh-huh.
young, and a lot of the older people are not. They're getting tired. They're tired of doing all the work all the time.
Right.
That's what's happening.
Mhm.
And so I'm sure you hear that from other people when we talk to you. It's
Yeah.
just that it's a hard road to hoe to put on a dog show. And then, like, for instance, what happened with the COVID in the beginning when they canceled show, everybody lost all their entry fees. There was no refunds at all. So people are hesitating about entering because they might not get their entry fee back or their motorhome fees,
Mhm.
So that's something that happened. I was on the slate to judge up in Washington this year, and they canceled the show at the last minute because of the COVID. And well, they'd already bought me a plane ticket. I mean, you can imagine all the money that's been put in to these shows, and when they cancel it, they don't get their money back either. So that's a financial burden on somebody's club that maybe are just on the edge.
Mhm. Mhm. What do you think could rejuvenate some of this? Do you think maybe because I know that there's been a since COVID there's been a few attempts at having virtual dog shows and virtual competition. Do you think something like that could help?
Well, it would be hard for me. It doesn't appeal to me because, like, I guess I come from the old school, and the whole point of dog shows is to judge your breeding stock. And the only way you could judge your breeding stock is you need to put your hands on those dogs.
Right.
And you can hide an awful lot through grooming. I mean, that has been done. And so I think we're losing the whole idea why we all got into showing dogs and we're comparing our breeding stock.
Mhm.
One thing that I think would have helped dog shows over the last couple of years has been introducing when agility came in, herding is fun. They got fast cat. They've got a lot of different things are coming because people want to have fun.
Mhm.
It becomes, and like I said, I just went locally here to a dock diving competition, not competition, it was an setup. And even though my dog didn't have a clue what she was doing, I thought, boy, this sure looks like a fun sport. And you wouldn't believe the people that showed up because they wanted to do this. It was just something fun.
Mhm.
So I think if they put more emphasis on, having something the family can do and the kids really enjoy. And I have to say, agility is fine. It's great, but it entails a lot of equipment and classes and stuff. Dock diving is there was a lot of young people in there doing the dock diving, throwing a dummy up the ramp for their Labrador to jump in. And there was a miniature dachshund dock diving.
Awesome.
So that was, I went there and I went, oh, my daughter doesn't know how to swim. I don't think she'll dive. And that was what happened. But it inspired me that, boy, this could sure be a fun sport. And it has really grown. So I think if they put more emphasis on the fun and making things fun, I think that could help rejuvenate it more so. Because a lot of young people aren't interested in breeding dogs. They're not interested in competing in the dog world. And it's become a very competitive sport. You've watched Westminster. You know what I'm talking about. And it's become a big money sport. So, young kids just don't have the finances to be doing something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
As with any dog, they do have a herding instinct. Okay. But what we learned years and years ago with our German Shepherds, Beardies, and our Boers, we do not allow our dogs to chase cats at all. We have got 3 cats, and I got pictures of, I should have sent you pictures of my dog bowl lined up, and the cat's just sitting there watching the dogs play. The dogs know they do not chase the cats, because I think what happens is you get into trouble when they go over the edge on prey drive because an animal's running. I've got my little corgi sleeps on a bed right now, and unfortunately, the cat's taken over her bed, and she doesn't know what to do about it. They all get along. I've got cats, I've got dogs. I do not allow them in with the livestock because I do have sheep and I have horses. They're not allowed in with livestock unless they're working. They're not allowed to chase. They're taught to behave and not to chase, and then they're taught properly how to gather stock. But the berries get along with everything. I mean, I have yet to have one that didn't get along with everything that is in my house. I just introduced one that was a year old that came back to me, and she just thinks she's landed in heaven because she's got 5 berries around with their border collies, their cats, their sheep, and this is wonderful. Like I said, that joy for life that they have. And I'm sure that there have been some issues, but it's not. I'd be more concerned about my old German Shepherds with the cats in the beginning than I would with the bearded collies.
Right, absolutely.
They get along with kids. They love children. They get along great with kids. Even if they've never met a kid, they love kids.
You probably don't have to deal with this too much being in Humboldt County, but how do they do in the warmer months?
That is an issue. That is an issue because Humboldt County is so cold. There is a lot of people that I know that live in hot country. My biggest issue has been going like down to the Bay Area or in the Sacramento in the summer and showing it's just too hot for my dogs. I mean, it's not fair to put them in 100-degree temperature when they're around 65 degrees normally. I do clip down some of my dogs, and people say that you shouldn't clip them down, but being in the livestock world, that they were gathering stock, they'd overheat very fast with the heavier coat. They do like to swim. They do like to go in the ocean. They do like to go in water. They're great dogs around. But when I was talking to a friend of mine, I said I was leery about placing a puppy down by her, and she's in Bakersfield, and she said, Kathy, to be honest with you, when it's hot, they come indoors. We have air conditioning. They don't leave them outside when it's that hot. And I said, yeah, in Humboldt County, we don't have air conditioning. So I don't really worry about that. But even this last week, it was warm, like it hit the 80s up here, which is almost 100, and they were laying in the shade. That was enough for them. They weren't running around. So they seek the shade when it's hot.
Right. And
but I was going to say there is a lot of beardies in Arizona, in Southern California, in New Mexico, and on the East Coast.
Right.
Well, my parents live in Wisconsin, and they had a beardie for 15 years, and they'd bring her inside. It was just too hot, too humid for her.
So what's a typical diet that you feed your bearded collies? Are they sensitive to foods or?
There's some berries that a lot of people do feed raw. I don't feed the raw diet. I just feed either ProPlan, a good diet with carrots and bones and treats, and my dogs have always done really well on that. One of my first berry, she had issues, and I did some confident because she was allergic to chicken, so I switched her over to chicken. I haven't had any of those issues. The biggest problem you run into I think with the breed is it living on the west coast of fleas, as far as that goes, because if they scratch and you're showing they're going to rip coat out. So you really have to have a pretty strong flea program. And they seem to be real sensitive to fleas. So that's something you need to pay attention to with them. Of all the breeds that I've had, I know they get one flea, they go crazy.
Right. And is there a difference of how you trim the coat when you're, say, in the agility field in the show ring, and what's the theory behind that?
Well, a lot of people that are showing in agility are also showing in the show ring, so you can't trim the coat. You can tidy up the feet, so that they don't slip. And as a judge, it doesn't bother me if they're slightly trimmed on the feet because if somebody lives in a house with carpeting, that they're not going to wear that hair off. And then when they run agility, you're allowed to tie the hair back out of their face. You cannot trim it if you're showing it. So a lot of people that I know that I've known over the years, including myself, we've done multiple venues at the same time. And within our club and several other clubs, they have what's called versatility awards. So you have to compete in the conformation, you have to compete in herding, you have to compete in obedience and or agility or tracking is something too that a lot of dogs are doing now. So you need to keep them in show coat, but you still, want to keep the hair out of their face when they're doing agility or herding. So, you'll trim up their feet and tie their hair back, and that's about it. Now, if you're just doing herding alone, you could clip the hair out of their eyes because they have to be able to see what they're herding as far as that goes. And you're not supposed to trim between the toes. They've got a hairy pad, but that's also going to pick up a lot of stickers. So if you're running your dog and herding, you better stop and examine all their feet when you're done. Make sure you don't have any stickers between your toes. I was gonna say, basically, you don't do that much because a lot of the people in these venues are all going for versatility awards, and it is a very versatile dog that you can do all these things with them. If you go to our Bearded Collie Nationals, they have actually awards for dogs by how many points they win by competing in each venue, and they've got to compete, I think, in at least 3 venues to be eligible for the awards. So say if you win in your class, you get so many awards. You win Dust to Breed, you get so many awards. You win Obedience, you get so many awards, and they're versatility awards. And it's fun. And you're very proud of your dog that they can do all these different things.
Right. Absolutely.
I've been doing it for so long that most of the people that come to me are previous bearded collie owners, or some who've gotten a puppy from me, which is really nice because then you know them. But if a new person calls me, my first question to them is, have you ever had a bearded collie? And what do you know about bearded collies? And why are you looking for a bearded collie? And then we start from there. Because if I get somebody calls me and says, I want a bearded collie, but more like a golden retriever temperament, I go, no, that's not a bearded collie. You want a bearded collie. And I explain them the negative aspects of the breed. Well, you realize there's a lot of grooming involved. You realize that they bark. You realize that they jump on people. These are all things that you need to think of before looking at a puppy. Have you been around bearded collies? Have you visited any bearded collies? Do you know anybody that has bearded collies? Can you afford to have the dog professionally groomed, or are you going to do it yourself? And those are all the things that I would ask a prospective person that's looking at bearded collies. And then if they had a bearded collie, I will say, well, how long have you had the bearded collie? Where did you get your bearded collie? Did you have any health issues with it? How did you go to obedience class? And do you have a fenced yard? That's a big deal to me, the fenced yard. And that's where we start the conversation. And I just feel the people out because I do get a lot of requests. And my first thing is, why do you want a bearded collie? And I'll ask them why. And sometimes they'll get them really thoroughly researched, and some people are just a whim that they just want a shaggy dog.
Right.
But the biggest thing is for them to meet a bearded collie. That you got to go to somebody, and then I'll ask where they live. And the bearded collie world is pretty small, and so they can say, "Oh, I'm in Colorado." I say, "Oh, you got to go call Kim. She's a veterinarian, da da da, and she's great, and she got bearded collies. If you could go visit her." And They go, oh, okay. And bearded collie people are really friendly about opening up their house to people to come see their dogs.
Oh.
The first thing I would do is I would join the Bearded Collie Club of America. And then I would start interviewing breeders and seeing if you connect with that breeder. Because if you buy a dog from somebody that you connect with, you get along with, and you ask them about their history, they're going to be your mentor. Because we have a mentoring program. I had a young gal that bought a dog for me 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and she wanted a pet, but it was a really, really nice puppy. She picked up, and I said, "Oh, what the heck?" Because my girlfriend kept saying, "Oh, that's what your top show puppy." Well, after she had her, she called me. She says, "I really want to show and breed." And I said, "Okay, then we have to co-own the dog together because I'm not putting a dog out in a breeding program that you're not going to do the health test." Well, we've become best friends, best friends. And she actually finished the dog herself. She drove all the way up the nationals, and now she's in the breeding program, and I'm measuring her on where to go, and she's done all the health tests, and she did everything right. And I can send somebody, like if somebody calls me from the East Coast, I'll say, you know what, I'm not the person for you. You need somebody. Here's some people on the East Coast I want you to call. You're within driving distance. That's what you need. You need somebody. And because the pit bulls would be, finding a male to breed to, getting your health test done, and you need somebody that could maybe come to your house and help you whelp your first litter. I've never had that where I live up here. I kind of learned on my own. And then also, too, is I'll send somebody a series of books. These are the books that you need. These are the best dogs. And any question you have, call me, and I will answer your questions. And then I can steer you in the right direction. Because I didn't have any of those available to me. So I joined the English club. I've actually been to Europe twice and interviewed breeders all over Europe about the different bloodlines because I wanted to see where my dogs came from. And I wrote letters. This was before the internet. I was writing letters to everybody. And people would write me back from Europe and said, this is what we got. And I said, what did you get when you bred this dog to this dog? And I get these long, letters from people. But that's how I learned. So a line of communication. If somebody writes me an email and they say, hi, I'm looking for your bearded puppy, how much? I usually delete that email. Right. They're not saying, hey, I'm really interested in the breed. I really am thinking about doing this. Or if somebody writes me and they say, I just want a pet. I don't want a show dog. And I said, there's no such thing as just a pet. You want the best bearded collie you can get to live with your family that is healthy and structurally sound, regardless, of what you're doing. Don't say just a pet. And that's what I tell everybody. And if you take your standard 5 and you breed, dogs that are basically have what you feel are the attributes of the breed, you'll stay in the breed for well. And longevity is something you want to push for also. The average age is 12 to 14. And I'm basically seeing dogs that taken care of and exercised and fed right, they're living to be 16. I've had 1 to 17. So those are questions I would ask and bring them up to people when they're looking to get into the breed. I think the biggest thing is people get discouraged when they get a dog and they want to show and they don't do well to start. And I tell them, you haven't been in the breed long enough. You need to go to more handling classes. You need to bite them. The internet, YouTube now, you could just punch in anything and you can find some good trainers on YouTube. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of tests that are applicable to the bearded collies that are available right now. There is a new one that came out 2 years ago called CEA, which is called Collie Anomaly. And what's really cool about that is that you can test your dogs and find out if they're a carrier or if they have it, and then once you know that like they aren't a carrier or they are a carrier, you know which direction to go in. And that's affected a lot of different other breeds. The bearded collie people have always been behind their dogs. I don't think it hurt them because so many of the show quality dogs that people are showing, they're still having working ability. Still, we haven't gotten that differentiation like say in the border collie world, where you see almost 2 different breeds in the show world versus the working world. And I've always stood really strong on health tests, but when I first started, my very first German Shepherd was severely dysplasia. tactic. So when I got into the bearded collies, a lot of people weren't x-raying. They weren't doing a lot of the things, 35 years ago. And I was adamant about it. I was adamant about x-raying hips and eyes and thyroid and doing all of that. And I said, down the road, you're going to really benefit because you're not going to have lame dogs. They're not going to break down. You're going to have a stronger gene pool. And so I think there's not been a differentiation. There has been some talk about bringing some other breeds in because they want to bring in some of the working lines. And I do myself have a problem with that because you don't really know if they really are working bearded collies or they're bearded collie border collie cross, which is very common. You'll see that now. A lot of people are crossing the two breeds, and it's not uncommon to see that. And I don't want to introduce into the bearded collie maybe some defects that the border collie is carrying that we don't have. And one interesting note is the very first registered border collie in history, its mother was a half beardy.
Okay.
Bearded collie came before border collie, believe it or not.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. So I think we're in a good spot because we have a good group of people that are protecting the breed and they're very careful about the breed. And we have bearded collie rescue. And I get people all the time goes, I'll take a rescue dog. I said the problem is we don't get a lot of rescues. And the only rescues we usually get are maybe some out of a puppy mill because there's a few puppy mills in the United States. I said because most bearded collie people that breed dogs, if there's an issue, they take it back. They don't. It doesn't go to rescue. They take it back and find a good home themselves, for it. But I do get a lot of people that tell me they'd rescue a bearded collie, and I go, well, you're going to be waiting for a while, because we don't get that many in. And what's kind of cool about all the DNA tests and everything that's going on now is we're able to do things that we couldn't do years ago. And also, too, is I think it's keeping a lot more people honest because everything is online now. And you go to the OFA, you look up a dog, you see what health tests have been done to that dog. And that's great, because it's all open. It's like an open book. That's something I like to see in a lot of breeds. I was looking at another breed that I was looking at, and I looked up the dog and no health tests done on the dog. None. Zippo. And I said, I said, I'm not interested. I said, there's certain tests that are mandatory that you do on certain breeds. And it doesn't guarantee that you're not going to have an issue down the road. It's just, if something comes out, you point to, I did this. I did do the health test and all the parents and grandparents and all that. It's just a backup. You do the best that you can with available for you at the time. I was in 2014. I judged the Bearded Collie Nationals on the East Coast, and you need to talk to people after the show about what you saw. And I said, our breed, I feel from when it first started, has gotten stronger and stronger. I said, the one thing I want all of you to bear in mind is really breathe for that structurally sound dog. Because a structurally sound dog is not going to break down. If you don't know what a structurally sound dog is, go to somebody and have them show you good shoulders, good body length, good rear angulation, no weakness in the dog. And I said, and it's important because your pet people are going to be doing the dog sports. And a dog that's structurally sound, like I said, is not going to break down. It's going to live a long, happy life, running and playing. And I said, we need to pay attention to the structure on the dogs. And there's a lot of seminars you can go to. There's a lot of videos you can go. There's a lot of books that you can read. But it does take you, I see several years to get to the point where you, can put your hands on a dog and you know what. And people will come up to me and say, well, what do you like about this? And I said, well, close your eyes and open your eyes and I'll show you. This is how you go over a puppy. This is how you do this. And this is how you do that. And you're going to find, like you mentioned, the more you do this and the more you study genetics, you understand about how things are passed on, your percentage of quality dogs is going to be higher and higher. It's just going to keep going up higher and higher. And you're going to get a really consistent, happy-go-lucky, structurally sound dogs. And also, too, you also want to go to a breeder that probably does a lot with their puppies. A little agility course, tunnels to go through, ramps to go up and down, and a lot of socialization, with their puppies. Because those first 8 weeks of their life can set that dog for life. In the bearded collie, I'm looking for one of the most important things that I'm looking for, besides temperament, because temperament is above everything, is I want a structurally sound shoulder assembly in the front. Because it's the front assembly that's going to be pulling that dog up over. It's going to be that front assembly that's going to be taken off when you're running with your dog. And I want a strong rear, and I want a good body length and a nice long rib cage, because that's going to be lung capacity for them to hold out when they're out there. And that you start with a blank slate, but as I stack my puppies up on their grooming table in their puppy room, probably 3 to 4 times a day, because I can't keep my hands off of them, you start to see it. You start, and that's the puppy that every time you put it up on the table, it doesn't move its feet. And so, and I'll say to someone, "You see that?" And they'll go, "Well, what do you mean?" I go, "A dog that doesn't move his feet and it stands really nice is comfortable in its body, and it means that it's structurally sound. It's balanced. I'm looking for a balanced dog. That would be the number one word, I guess, balanced, front and rear. There's other things that can come up. Like I have a gorgeous female right now that she probably wouldn't finish this year, but there's been no shows. She moves like a dream. The one thing I don't like about her is her eyes are a little light. I prefer a darker eye, but she doesn't move on her eyes. That's her eyes are fine. It's just that I prefer a darker eye. So when I go to breed her, I'm going to look to complement her to find a male just like her, but with a darker eye, because the darker eye is dominant over the light eye. And because I don't want to keep that going, I want a darker eye. And there's been some phenomenal males out there with a lighter eye, and that's why we're starting to see a little bit more, because it was ignored. And that's not the most important thing, but when you start to see too much of a fault, then you have to, for, hey, let's pull back. Where are we going to go? And I have my male that I had from the Netherlands, and he's on frozen semen. I'm just waiting to use it on one of my dogs. So he's the darkest play imaginable. It was like, so a lot of us do that too, is that we get a young dog with promising, we'll freeze the semen on it and use it years down. He was collected in, you think, 2000? Yeah, 20 years ago. So you pay storage every year and with a vet, but that's looking toward the future on maintaining your bloodlines. A lot of people said, how would you improve the breed? I don't think our breed needs improvement. People can top that out. I'd like to maintain the quality of our breed is what I would like to do. I would like to just maintain the good things that we have. I think it's kind of hard to improve upon the bearded collie myself. I think they're a wonderful dog. I dealt quite a bit with that coming from the border collie world. I mean, we have a breed on the West Coast here called a McNab. And that basically was the dog that came from Scotland in the 1800s, the McNab Ranch in Ukiah. Right. And they bred to the local dogs because they didn't want the heavy coat. They wanted a shorter coat. Right. They didn't want the big head. The problem, I think, with the bearded collies that I've seen, and people can argue the point with this, I think the coat on several dogs being shown has gotten too profuse. And some people would say, well, it's just grooming. I said, no, there's certain bloodlines that carry a heavier coat. People that work on ranches, they're working on stock, do not want a heavy, profuse coat that's going to be matting all the time. The harsh, old-fashioned coat is so easy to take care of. You have to put a lot more work into it to get it to finish in the show ring, because a harsh coat will break off. So preservation for me is, the breed is not going to be around if we're breeding dogs that people aren't going to want to take care of. We've lost the large ranches as far as getting a dog to work stock. I mean, people can be hobby breeders, and we've got sheep and we had cattle. It's not a breed that's used extensively because of the care. Like in California, we run with a lot of ranchers. They want slick-coated dogs. They do not want all this hair. So I think what I'm preserving my breed for is as companions, even though they were bred for working, and I sent you several pictures of my dogs working. They were bred for working. People just love it, but it's going to take a lot of care of their coats. If you're going to work them on stop, then you're going to have them out, in foxtails and mud and dirt and all that. But I think the bearded collie is so versatile that it's filled so many venues. Like we talked about, agility, therapy, herding, obedience. I'm not a fan of introducing other breeds, because we have enough herding breeds that do what everybody needs right now. And the bearded collie, regardless of the fact that it's not bred for herding, still herd. I've got one young one right now. I have to be careful when I'm running my dogs because she goes to the head of all my dogs, and she's herding. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And I'm gonna probably take her down to the Bay Area and put her with a trainer and start training her for stock trial because she's that good. But she's really strong. She's really strong. And the only concern I have is taking her into the heat, in the summertime. So I'll probably be just spring training and bring her home because I won't put her out in the heat in Sacramento, that whole area down there. But people are working their beardies and they're working show lines. So I don't see the need to introduce other dogs. I know what you're talking about because, like I said, my border collies that I have are working stock. They're cow dogs, but it's not show lines. And so we've trialed our dogs around people that do cross. And my best friends on the ranch, and they cross dogs all the time to get what they want to work cattle. What my best advice to anybody that is new, and I have young people younger than me that want to get involved, and I'll say, "Did you read the book?" And I go, "Well, I went online." I said, "No, no, no, no. Did you read the book?" And I said, "You need to know where they came from. You need to understand the back of these dogs." When I went to Europe, I had written several people, and I actually went to kennels in Germany and in France. I went to the French Nationals, and I went to talk to people that were older that were in beardies when it first started. And I went around to all these kennels, and when I applied for my judging license, the AKC rep, because you have to be interviewed, she said, "The one thing about your applications is the fact that you went and interviewed all these breeders and asked about the bloodline of their dogs." And my Haagen-Dazs was from an old bloodline, and that's why I brought him over. He wasn't shown very much, but a lot of his puppies made a huge mark in the United States. You can talk to any bearded collie person that's been around and say, "Did you ever know Haagen-Dazs?" And that's all you have to say. His name was Haagen-Dazs. And he produced, this is interesting, fabulous temperament, fabulous structure, but he never worked stock a day in his life. I'm not kidding. But I learned from my rancher friends that it can skip a generation. He had kids that were phenomenal on livestock. But if I put him on my sheep, he would go out to the sheep to see what they were eating. That was about it. He did not care to work stock at all. But he was a fabulous producer. So, he's behind almost all my dogs that I have here now. And he produced. His daughters were phenomenal, just phenomenal, as were his sons. So you have to have an open mind when you're into breeding, but you really have to know your history, and you have to call people up or go to a show and talk to somebody and just say, "Hey, do you have a minute? I wanted to ask you about this bloodline. What do you think of that bloodline?" And then I'll say, "Well, the reason they did Haagen-Dazs was because his mother had a YI and they went to the Sunbreeze bloodline." And this is what you get into. And you say, "You look for this on your bloodline. This is what you're looking for." And then you need to understand genetics. Good shoulder assembly is recessive. Light eyes recessive. Dark eyes is dominant. So there's certain rules that always apply across the board. Like I try and tell people, I go, "You're not gonna go out with a Pomeranian to gather sheep."
No.
But I think because they just don't have it in them. And I've actually had border collies that did not work. They came from dogs that have won the working dog nationals. And somebody had said to us, "We'll get rid of her." She was the most beautiful border collie we ever had. She was so sweet. She was so wonderful. And I said to my husband, I said, "You know what? She got it behind her." And I said, "There's that really nice dog from Texas that's down in Monterey. We're going to breed her to Rudy." Well, she went on to produce the most phenomenal working dogs. And she never worked a day in her life. So the genetics is behind those dogs, and it comes up. All of a sudden it pops up. You see it. The problem we have is we don't have the work for these dogs that they were bred for. So do you tone down the genetics? I just got a bearded collie back that I co-bred with another breeder, Patty, wonderful gal, and she owed me a puppy. And it was out of a dog that I sold, this phenomenal working dog. And it was the last year, and she said, "Oh, she's the only black female. I really want to keep her. I'm getting a little too old. Do you mind if you don't take her?" And I said, "Not a problem." But she was everything I wanted in my breeding program. Well, then she called me in May and said, "You know what?" And I go, "What?" She goes, "She's way too much dog for me." She said, she's the type of dog that you like. And I said, not a problem. I'll come over and get her. And I got her. And I brought her home. My husband goes, what a great dog. I said, yeah, but not for Patty. You know what I mean? Is like, she was great for me because I'm on 4 acres. Like, it's ruckling tumble. She's kind of bombastic. She doesn't have an aggressive word, but she wants to work. And she's a too much dog. She'd be too much dog for a lot of pet people. And you recognize that when they're little. And that's why you have to be really careful where you place your dogs. You know, you need to know the people, what's your lifestyle. Do you run? How old are you? I actually ask people that. How old are you?
Right.
You know? And they'll go, well, I'm 75. And I go, yeah, probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
You know, but I get that a lot of that. I do get a lot of that because they're pretty and they look sweet and until they knock grandma down, you know, and stuff like that. And that's when so you recognize what you have because you've been doing what you've been doing. A lot of people try and chase that, and you do the best you can to monitor it. That's your responsibility that you could read your dog. I mean, I've got neighbors that walk their black lab every day, and he's a little aggressive. They walk him at 8:25 every day. I make sure all my dogs are locked up because otherwise my dog will fence run, and I know it. And my husband goes, "What the dog done?" I said, "No, they're walking Ramsey down the road." And he goes, "When?" I go, 8:25 every day. But I don't want a bunch of fence running dogs.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not fair to them either because they should be able to walk their dog. This is interesting you bring that up because we trained our border collies with Merlin, Fanning, Newton, which were in Red Bluff, top stock dog people. We bought the border collie that didn't work, okay, from them. They didn't do health tests. They didn't do anything. They said, get rid of her. And I told my husband, I said, you know what's really interesting? They make a big deal about this working ability. The minute something doesn't go right, they're down the road.
Yeah.
Whoever's got the money, they sell the dog. And I said, they don't put any thought into why it was just. And I told Kenny, I said, we're not getting rid of Bootsy.
No.
And I go, she's really well wed, Juke. Yeah, but she doesn't work. And I go, that doesn't mean that she can't produce. Yeah. My girlfriend that owns a huge ranch Cape down on the West Coast, we're best friends. Her first dog, they got a dog years ago from Scotland, Border Collie. Never worked a day in her life. She said all she would do is go underneath the gooseneck trailer and bite at the horses. They bred her, and they got Jeff, they had for 17 years, who was the most phenomenal dog they've ever had. So she had told me these stories, and that was before I really got into breeding my dogs. So I stopped listening to people, and I thought, I'm just going to see what happens. Well, Missy, who was the daughter of the dog that didn't work, I bred her to my friend Debbie Collies at the herding facility. 4 of those dogs out of Missy now have got herding trail championships. We're not talking just, they're phenomenal. They work stock, they work cattle, they work sheep, they work ducks. And Debbie's gone on with that bloodline. She's using it now. But if I had to listen to what these people said, and I kept telling my husband, I said, I can't believe it. I said, it's whoever's got a check for that dog, they're down the road and they're out of there, or they give it away. They don't care. And I go, I don't understand this, but I think they get so obsessed about the working ability. And what I notice is I don't think a lot of these people know pedigrees or genetics. And they'll breed dogs or they'll buy a dog, but they really don't pay attention to the bloodlines. And so if you keep an open mind and you're not, because this division I hate this division when people get nappy about this and, oh, you pet or oh, you this. Give yourself an open mind and look to the future about where this breed is going. 90% of the people that buy dogs from us are pet people that are looking for good companions. I'm not concerned about show homes because they're looking at a little different venue. If I keep something for a show home, like I've got people on lists from Europe that want to have my Haagen-Dazs breeding. It's really hard to ship a dog to Europe nowadays. So I'm not really that concerned about that. It's more for my own, what I want to have on my own property. But it's like, you got to keep an open mind and leave your ego at home. Leave your ego at home.
Right.
Because you may see a dog you have to love and you can't stand the owner and you got in a verbal altercation, like you said, you bite your tongue. My girlfriend is a really good friend of mine that they co-breed together. We were talking yesterday. She goes, I think we have a lot of control freaks in the dog show world. She did think about it. Everybody's really controlling about their dog, their bloodline. how the dog behaves in sports. And I said, "Till you ever look at that, but I think you're right. She's right. There's a lot of control that's going on." But I think the longer you're in it, the more you see things that you never thought you'd see.
Right.
You learn something and you just go, "Wow, I never knew that. Wow, that's really cool. Well, that's really fun." And you learn stuff, and so if you keep an open mind, I think you'll do okay. I just don't know what's going to happen down the road with all the crazy things that are going on in the United States. And it's expensive to do a breeding program. In the old days, they'd kennel with 30, 40 dogs and they could experiment, and, you know, it was considered okay. And now the hobby breeder, maybe one or two dogs, if that. And there's a lot of research going on. It's hard to keep up on everything. So I tend to fall back on old school a lot. So, you know what?
Wow.
This is what I'm going to do. Yeah, what works for me.
Right. Absolutely.
But there's a lot of really good people out there. And then, like the gal that decided that she wanted to breed dogs, we turned out to be really good friends. She calls me like once a week and said, "This is what I'm thinking. What do you think?" And I go, "Let's get your dog pregnant first.
Yeah, right.
Get her. I'm not going to worry about it." I'm actually going to, she's in Texas. I'm actually going to fly out there and help her whelp her litter because she had never raised a litter puppy before,
Oh, awesome.
which means I got to have my husband babysit all my dogs while I'm gone. So
Because of the money situation, do you think there needs to be more of a collectivist attitude instead of a kind of a consumer market driven attitude?
it's kind of difficult if you talk to people that are really into it. A good friend and I were talking the other day, and she's breeding a litter, and she said, "I've got a couple people that don't want to show, but they're willing to let me use the dogs in a breeding program."
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "We're losing too many good dogs to pet homes that are actually top to the gene pool because we're requiring that they spay and neuter everybody." And I agree with her, but the average person isn't willing to take somebody's pet dog into their house and raise a litter. But she's a preservationist like I am, and it's kind of like if you want the dog to come back to you. And she just called a friend back east who's looking for another male, and she says, "You know what we'll do is we'll collect them and freeze and store it." So that's what happens. We have to have people like that are willing to say to the pet person, "You know what, I'm letting you have the show puppy. I know you don't want, to breed or raise, but if you let me have the dog just back for one litter or two and then spay them, or if you let me collect your male after the health tests are done, I'll let you have them for a reduced rate. I'll give you the dog."
Uh-huh.
That's what I've done with a couple people too. It's been like, "Oh, I have this really great dog, but I've got 12 dogs and I can't do one more. I don't have a place." I'm like, "Close. You take this dog. The agreement is I get something back." Like the dog I just got back that she didn't want to give me last year, I put in my contract, if it works out, I'd like a puppy back mainly for my breeding program. And I picked the male for her, and it was an outstanding litter. Now I've got this dog back, and she's everything I would want in the bearded collie, except she's a little waku, but she's just a year old. Okay. So I preserved some really good bloodlines with that dog.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's who I would go on with. And if I meet somebody who would be willing to raise a litter, my good friend that has Cardigan Wells Corgis, she'll place an older female that's a finished champion in a pet home. Can I have her back for a litter because we want to keep the bloodline going? So that's an option, so you don't lose the gene pool on some of these dogs that are fabulous.
Right.
Not every fabulous dog is going to make it in the show. When you get a litter and you got dogs in the old days that all finished their championship, but you don't have any homes that are willing to show, what do? You put them in good homes, which is what is most important. So I have a hard time seeing doing a collective effort just because of the individual personalities and everybody, how they think.
Right.
That is like you said, you run into certain people that think one way and other people think another. And if you add up what it costs you to raise a dog, do health tests and breed them, and then go through everything as far as placing dogs, it's not a big money maker. Now, if you're in a puppy mill where you're not doing anything, you're not doing health tests, you're not showing them, you're not, putting back into your breed, then I'm sure there is a financial reward on that end.
Right.
But vet bills have risen tremendously.
Yeah.
Tremendous, especially on the West Coast. Tremendous vet bills. I mean, just to even do a frozen insemination with my own stud dog and no stud people probably cost me $3,000 just in help desk alone to do it. But that's because it's gone up. And I'm on a couple of lists, on the internet, and people will do questions like, well, what are you paying for a C-section? What are you paying for progesterone tests? And it's amazing how it's different all across the board. About the most expensive, I think, is the East Coast and the West Coast. In between, it's not nearly expensive. I mean, when my dirty had a litter this year, and I took her in the vet just for an X-ray to family puppies. My bill was $350,
Yeah.
and she was in there for 5 minutes. Seriously. I went, seriously? I couldn't believe it. It was never like that before, and I wasn't expecting that. I still would have done it because I needed to do it. But it was like, wow, prices are really going up. So I tell people that. They said, vet bills are expensive. You want to make sure that your dogs are healthy. You may pay a little bit more for a purebred, but if they've done the health test and they've got a good track record behind their dog, you're going to come out ahead in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key. So what is, like, when you freeze semen, what is that process like, and where do you store it, and how do you store it?
It's been so long since I froze it the last one. It wasn't that expensive when I did it 20 years ago. I think I paid like $500 a collection. And I was using Dr. Popton, who's down in Santa Rosa, who's a fertility expert. And then it was being stored in his facility down there. And I paid $100 a year. And he just told the practice that he moved all the semen over to Grass Valley. So it's a new place over there. And I think it went up to like $120 a year. So, it adds up, during the year. The years go by. And so that's usually what it costs, but it also varies depending on where you're going and who you're dealing with. One of the top fertility experts is in Ohio, Dr. Hutchison. And a lot of people have semen stored there. And then you went into problems now with COVID going across the Canadian border for shipping. Europe, it's really expensive to ship semen over to Europe, like $3,000. So just to ship one way. So usually when a breeder approaches somebody about this, the breeder pays for everything.
Right.
If we place a dog with somebody and we want them back to collect them, we'll pay for the collection and the storage. Because basically you own it, And before you can even do that, you have to have a DNA in your dog, and all the health tests have to be done. Because that's how they identify the semen, is through the DNA.
Right.
If you're using it for yourself, you want a facility by you, because otherwise you've got to pay for shipping, and that's really expensive to ship the semen. I had it with Randy because we're in Humboldt County. There's no fertility vets. They don't even do artificial inseminations up here. When you go into frozen, you're dealing with, it used to be surgical implant, and now they're doing what you call transcervicals. And that seems to be more popular versus the surgical implant. And I did a surgical implant. I've done a couple, 2 failed and 1 worked. And I'd be more inclined, if I do this next year, I'll probably be driving to Los Angeles to a clinic down there.
Okay. Yeah.
Who's had a high success rate.
Right.
But you got to figure, Humboldt County, the LA 12 hours, hotels. It really adds up, but that's what you do if you want it to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, right now what the clubs are doing, like when you run a club that runs a show, nobody's being paid. They're all doing that for free as it is.
Right.
What's costing is parking,
Yeah.
buildings, entry fees. It gets really big. There is a junior handler program, and there's also the owner handler program. But I don't think, unless they come from a family that does competition, or be it cattle, rabbits, rodeo, they're not unless they're inclined. I think it's a different generation. I don't know how you bring it up unless you maybe drop the fees for juniors more, or you drop the fees. It used to be puppy classes were, less expensive. Well, just to walk in the ring for 2 minutes is $37 now. So, I mean, it adds up. And then you got to factor everything in. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. I think, and also too, is with all these other sports coming in, people would rather spend their money going to an agility trial than going to a dog show.
Right.
It's more fun. Like I said about the dock diving, there's a lot of other venues that I think are more fun for the kids, unless they're a die-hard breeder wanting to do that, like I was. As a kid growing up, that's all I ever wanted to do. And there was a lot of people like me that wanted to do that. But when you're at the dog show and you realize that you're one of the young ones, you're just like going, oh my goodness. They, I don't have the answer. I don't know what it is. And also, too, if you think about it, they're from a family of showing dogs. Maybe they don't want to show dogs, but that's what they grew up doing. They want to go out and do their own thing. So I think everybody has to find it. I don't know what the future is going to be. I think there'll always be dog shows, but it may end up being mixed breed shows. The whole point is about breeding, and there is an anti-breeding, agenda. Adopt, don't shop. And so that's it's almost like you're bad if you buy a purebred dog, which is really sad because they're all the dogs are good. You just have to find what works for you. The difference in a purebred dog versus, say, a crossbred is that you have more knowledge on what that dog's personality, coat, environment, health is going to be like to fit your need. There's somebody posted a joke on Facebook the other day, and I laughed. It was a guy going to a trainer, and he says, I'm having a real hard problem with my dog. He pulls me, and then if he's off leash when we're running, he goes in the woods and chases wildlife. And the guy says, well, what is your dog? And he goes, well, the mom's a Siberian Husky and the dad's a red-bone coonhound. And he says, see, you bred two dogs together, one that drags you and one that hunts wildlife. And he said, yeah. And he goes, well, how do I stop it? And he goes, you have what you have. This is what was bred. And it's what you know what they're like. I tell people, if you don't want a dog to pull, don't get a Siberian Husky or a Malamute.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're going to do. If you don't want a dog to herd, don't get a Corgi or a lot of the herding breeds, or don't go to working lines, strong working lines, because that's all you'll have is the working ability. And see, I've been around some fabulous, and what people don't understand about Germany, when I got my dog Haagen-Dazs, he was from a male in Germany, and I looked at the pedigree and I said, since I'm familiar to the breeder, I go, the grandmother is a Schutzhund 3. And this is a bearded collie pedigree. See, although everybody does Schutzhund in Germany.
Yeah.
And she says, but you can't do Schutzhund unless you have a solid dog. And so I would, when DOS is the people would say to me, what's the SCH for? And I go, Crystal Para did Schutzhund with Dickens. She had Schutzhund 3 on it and a Schutzhund 2 on another dog. And when I visited her in Germany, she pulled her sleeve out and showed me the dogs doing Schutzhund. She said it's, and I'm like going, it opened my eyes to the fact that here and I have a Bearded Collie pedigree with Schutzhund behind it.
Right.
I mean, it's like going, oh my goodness, because these people are open. And when I mentioned poodle to my sister, because she was looking for a dog on the East Coast, I said, Monica, look at the standard poodle. And she says, oh my God, I know what a poodle. I said, you just need to understand about the breed. You can't get a more solid dog as you get from a good breed. They're fabulous dogs. And she ended up getting some dogs in the Humane Society that had issues with children, issues with people. And I said, Monica, why didn't you look at poodles? I didn't want a foo-foo dog. I go, they're not foo-foo dogs. Do you know that there was a team of poodles? I don't know if they competed in the Iditarod. I may be wrong. I read an article, or it was just one of the big races up by Nome, but I'm pretty sure they didn't finish the Iditarod, but they competed, a team of poodles.
Right.
I mean, they can do anything that breed can. And probably the only reason I didn't get involved in them is the severe scissoring and trimming for the breed ring. Yeah. There's so much of that you have to do a poodle. Yeah. And I've been mentored in poodles by a friend of mine who's a judge for poodles. And we sat across the poodle ring watching poodles all day. I mean, just fabulous dogs. So, I mean, if he says that, it's true. Trust me, especially the German, because the Germans are very strict about their dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is also really fascinating to me because what was the process of you becoming a judge?
It was pretty involved. You can go to the AKC and you could download there. It actually has the instructions on what is required to be a judge, the minimum requirements of it. And I can't remember because I'm also a judge for corgis. Um, you have to do so many assignments as a restorer. You have to how many litter you've bred, how many champions you've raised, and then how many sweepstakes you've judged, and which is what's put on by the National Club. There's a bare minimum of what you have to do, and then you have to write an essay. And then once you get interviewed by the AQC, they look at your paperwork to see if you've done at least the minimum. Then they'll approve you to be what's called provisional. And once you're provisional, when you go to a show, you're watched by an AKC representative, a rep, what's called a rep. And they watch you, and then they talk to you before you judge, and they talk to you after you judge, and they tell you what they like about your judging and what they don't like about your judging, and what they would recommend that you do, and how you improve. And you have to go through at least 3 AKC provisional assignments. That's why if you look up people entering shows, it'll say next to the judge provisional, which means that they're being watched by the AKC, and it's very, you have to pass, before, and if they don't feel you're ready, they won't pass you on to be a judge. Once you are provisional and you fill the requirements, then after that, you're allowed to, like, say I applied for bearded collies, and then after that, you're allowed to do one-on-one, which means I applied for corgis, and then the rep said you could apply cattle for up to 6 breeds because of you're attending seminars and you're attending workshops. And like when I go to the national, I'm on the judge's education committee. And so what'll happen is if I'm not showing a dog that day, I sit with the prospective judges and I will mentor them on the breed all day long. We'll sit ringside and they'll ask me questions. And it's really funny because now you'll go out there and show and you'll see people you mentor that you're showing to, but you sit there and tell them what you want to see in a bearded collie. And then you have a hands-on workshop at the end of the day where the winners come to the workshop, and then you go with the judges and you get to put your hands on each one. So by going to the shows and going to the national, that's another part of getting your judge's license. It takes you several years to do this. And I stopped at corgi because I'm actively competing in breeding, and it's very hard to do both.
Right.
And I do judge, but I didn't apply for more breeds because here's an example. Say I breed a litter on the West Coast and several people from me, my dogs from me, and they're showing and stuff. And then they say, please don't accept any assignments because, see, they can't show to me.
Right.
So if I accept say an assignment in Sacramento and I've got several people down there that dogs from me, they're not going to be real happy because they can't go to the show. You cannot have a financial dealership. I think it's within a year of selling a dog. Okay. But my whole thing is if it's got my kennel name on it and I bred it, sorry. And also too, a lot of people don't realize is once you're a judge, you cannot show any dog in the ring unless you own it and it lives at your house.
Okay.
And they kind of changed that a little bit. You don't have to live at your house, but if your name's on that dog, I can't, if somebody walked up to me ringside and says, could you hold my dog for a minute? I say, I'm sorry, I can't hold your dog. And they'll look at me and I go, I'm a judge. I cannot touch your dog because it gives the appearance of impropriety.
Right.
Outside the ring. So you're really kind of restricted once you get your license as far as what you can and cannot do.
Do you have any experiences showing in, like, say, the UKC?
No, I'd never done UKC.
Yeah.
No, I've just done AKC, and then I'd done ASCA herding, and my husband and I did quite a bit of through the USBCHA, which is the United States Border Collie Association, not AKC. And they're really funny because, like, if you breed a dog, because ours are dual registered, I register them, the beardies, the borders, AKC and USBCHA, the pedigree on the border collie says if you would can AKC championship on the border collie, your papers will be rescinded. It says that right on the pedigree. Yep. So anybody I sold the border collie to, I said, you can't show them in the breed ring in AKC because I'll lose my registration. because most of my dogs that I was breeding was for agility and herding and, stuff like that.
Right. Can you talk about your experiences with the border collie and what made you what drove you to owning and competing and breeding that style of dog?
Well, we've always had herding dogs, and we have all of our best friends have ranches, and it's just how our life has been. And one day we were at the Cattlemen's Association. A friend of mine said, "Do you know anybody who wants a border collie puppy? I've got a gorgeous litter of puppies up here, but I don't have any homes." And my husband had just lost his German Shepherd, and I grabbed my girlfriend. I said, "Let's go out to the Lone Star Ranch and look at puppies." And I came home with JJ. That was our first, and we just got him as a companion, but he was fabulous. And then we decided to put him in training, and we went over to Merlin Sandy at Cow Dog College, and JJ did fabulous, but Sandy thought we needed a little bit more dog. And another friend was breeding a really nice litter, some old stock. And of course, me, I bought every single book on the old bloodlines, and it turned out there was some really good bloodlines, and we bought Edie. And my husband had so much fun with her. But when you do USBCH on Cow Dog College, it's on horseback. So we were always borrowing horses you literally are gathering cattle on horseback. Well, then, of course, that lived, we had to buy a horse. And then after we bought that horse, we decided to breed her. And then we got another horse out of her and sent that one for training. And pretty soon we have 3 horses and 10 border collies. And, it was so much fun. It was really a lot of fun. And my husband is one of those people that once he starts something, he gets really involved in it. And so he was traveling quite a bit and trailing his dogs with USBCHA. United States Border Collie Association is what it is. But he was doing the cow dog thing. He was not doing sheep. Okay. And so it's a little rougher and tougher, and it's on horseback. So then it's a lot easier to have your own horse than to borrow a horse from somebody. And so now basically there's not a lot of trials anymore. They kind of canceled over the last couple of years. Several of the ranches that were holding sold out. And so basically what he's done on horseback with his dogs is go to the ranches and help gather cattle all the time now, which he has a lot more fun than going to the trials. So he actually has a working cow pony and his working dogs. And that's how we actually got into it. And then several people in the AKC world bought dogs for me to do agility with and herding with. And they just excelled phenomenally. And a good friend of mine that owned Turdy for You down in Vacaville, Debbie Pollard, she took a female from that because it was out of Hermia that we bred. And now she's gone on with her whole bloodline with Border Collies out of the foundation bit that she got from me. So Debbie's kind of carrying it on for me because I'm at the point where it's hard to find homes for working Border Collies that I feel, unless they're a ranch or they're going to work their dogs. These dogs need to be worked. They really need exercise. And my husband takes 4 dogs to work with him every day. I'm not kidding you. 4 dogs every day. And then he runs them on the river bar or stuff, and he uses them to gather cattle. And we've got, six boarders. Yeah, and 1 young one. And they've been great dogs, but he really does a lot of training with them, a lot of foundation work, and they listen to his every word. They're his dogs. So I lost my last boarder 2 years ago. She was really nice, but I kind of feel that adding any more dogs is taking away time from my other dogs.
Right. Can you explain the good and the bad about the border collie?
It's really hard to say bad.
Right.
And even though you hear all these things about, oh, you don't want a border collie if you don't do that. I think the key is exercise, and we're pretty active, and we're on 4 acres. The dogs get turned out to run all the time. And if you do foundation work, and the most important thing to teach a border collie, actually any dog, is to settle, to chill, to learn how to relax. And the bad part is people don't teach their dogs foundation. They don't teach them to wait at the door. They don't teach them to wait for they don't teach them to be sound and settle in their body. That's the bad part, because you can get a neurotic dog that's running everything. My husband can literally drop all the dogs in a row and they will not break because they know not to break their stays. They're really easy to train. I think our border collies, to be honest with you, they're easier than my bearded collies, because the beardies are kind of like, wahoo, and the borders are, yes, sir. What do you want me to do? And it could be the dogs that we picked, but I have to say, a lot of the dogs, that have gone out from our bloodline, people have said this is the best dog they've ever owned because they settle, they calm down. But we did quite a few seminars in the early day. There's a really nice trainer out of Canada called Elvin Kopp, and he'd won the Calgary Stampede with his Border Collies. And I did a week-long seminar with him over in Red Bluff, and it was phenomenal what he taught us as far as getting your dogs to settle. Very quiet way, very quiet. Starting them at 8 weeks, if not sooner.
Wow.
Well, most of the people that got dogs from me were ranchers or somebody that had stock, and they knew what they were looking for. And I would ask them what they were doing and what was their experience with Border Collies. And I got lucky in that so many of the people had already had Border Collies before and they knew what they were doing. And a couple of agility homes that got dogs from me were phenomenal. They've gone on to win Master Agility Championships. They were all experienced people. I don't think I've ever sold the Border to anybody that hadn't had one before, because I'm kind of hard to find. So if they found me, they were looking. You know, it wasn't just a casual, it wasn't an ad in the paper. It was, you know, so-and-so's got these Border Collies and they're really nice. Or I had people say, what are you doing your next litter? Would you put me down? And this is what I'm looking for. So the main criteria was, have you been around Border Collies? A lot like with the Beardies, and the care is not near as much as far as coat and stuff on the borders. Well, when I think the future for all dogs with reputable breeders is good because a lot of people are doing health tests. It's really interesting. When I bought my first border from the ranching area, no health test had been done at all. And I took it upon myself to do the health test on the dog, and Cap was flying colors. But my attitude was, if they aren't healthy, or if they don't work, they're down the road. So they're not keeping, you know, something that doesn't work. And so they're not testing. Most of them weren't testing back there. I think the future is good for them because people are doing the health tests. I did hips and I did eyes. One thing we did have, though, which was really interesting, was my husband was at a branding and somebody brought a female in season and she was loose. Nobody knew it. And she bred to one of our male because it had all its health tests done. And I told my husband, I said, you know what, you're looking for a new female, even though she was a crossbred. You know, they weren't quite sure of her pedigree. I said, why don't you pick a puppy out of Australian Silver female? Because they're really good working dogs. So we took a puppy, Sue, gorgeous female, looks just like the male that we own. And that was the puppy we wanted. And we had her about a year and a half. We still have her, but at a year and a half, she started crusting up on her nose, her eyes. And, you know, I took her to the vets, and he sent a sample to UC Davis, and she has lupus.
Oh.
And she can't go outside. She can't go in the sun. Her kennel's covered. So she's out early in the morning and the fog's in, she's loose, and we have to use a 50 sunscreen on her. We've got her on supplements, and she's lost all the pigment. And if she's in the sun, it breaks out into bleeding ulcers. Wow. And I call people this. I said, this is out of a dog that was a crossbred, you know. So this was not out of a purebred dog. This was out of a dog found on the side of the road. I mean, basically, with no health tests done or anything. And I said, so you can't always say as purebred dogs have all these issues.
Right.
You know, and who's to say the click happened that somehow she's got looks. I've never had a dog with lupus in 4 years. And when I went to my vet, he said, this looks like lupus. I said, really? Which is an autoimmune disease.
Right.
And she looks fabulous. She's never sick. She looks great. But she can't be in the sun at all.
Right.
At all.
If, what breed of dog that you've never owned or handled personally that interests you the most, and why?
Oh, there's so many.
You could name your top 3.
My top breed, well, I would probably go back if I could find a German Shepherd like I started with. I love my first German Shepherd Steel was phenomenal. He was old bloodline. I got a CD on him in 3 straight shows, the CDX on him. By the time he was 2 years old, he cut 2 obedience titles. He was the most gentle dog, the best. If I could get another Steel in a heartbeat, even though he was 90 pounds, you know, he was just a fabulous dog. So right off the bat, Steel comes to mind. I probably wouldn't go anything in the toy group, but I would probably stick to the herding group. There's so many herding breeds that attract me. The Beardy still come to me being my favorite. I mean, it just I have my most Corgi. I absolutely love her. I've had cardigans. I've bred cardigans. I've had borders. I probably will always have a Beardy. And I know you're saying that I haven't owned, but if I had you, I did have. I looked at Picardies, which is they call it the Winn-Dixie dog, and I like those. But I read a lot about them and said they had to be heavily socialized, that they could be shy, and I kind of steer away from that. I don't want to have to keep dealing with a shy dog. It's just a lot of work. Um, boy, top of my probably a German Shepherd, but I owned it. So you're asking for anyone I've never owned. That's a tough question. That's a really tough question. I have to really think about that. You know what? It probably would be a poodle.
Yeah.
It probably would be a poodle. I gotta say, it probably would be a poodle. I probably would go for that. Oh, I know a dog I'd love to own. A Whippet.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I would love to own a Whippet.
Yeah.
I looked into Whippets years ago, but they were really sensitive to chemicals. And that was before we came out with Advantage and we have such a flea problem. I didn't want a dog that I couldn't deal with fleas, on. So I love a Whippet, definitely a Whippet and a poodle.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really cool breed. I think that they're really neat little dogs. I wouldn't want anything really big though. I think a Whippet. Italian Greyhounds, I like them, but they're too fragile. I'd probably break one. Yeah. They're really neat little dogs. But and I actually have the Suffolk Spaniel. They're really cool little dogs.
Yeah, I love those too. Yep.
I'm lucky that I have restraint as I get older because I probably own one of every herding breed. Herding breed or some of those. My girlfriend shows Irish setters and she has beautiful Irish setters. They're just gorgeous, but they're too big for me.
Right.
They're just too big.
Yeah, Chinese dog.
No, I could see a Whippet. I think a Whippet would probably go to the top because there's no grooming and they're really cool dogs.